Revelation 18. After this I saw another angel coming down from heaven. He had great authority, and the earth was illuminated by his splendor. With a mighty voice he shouted.
So this angel seems to have more authority than the others. He had great authority, and the earth was illuminated by his splendor. You might even say that this is Jesus himself, but it doesn't say that, so I won't assume it either.
Fallen is Babylon the Great.
So this prophecy is saying that it's sealed in stone, that Babylon the Great, or Jerusalem is what it's really talking about, is already fallen. Now, it hasn't fallen yet because this was written during the reign of Nero and before 68 AD, but it's written concerning things that are imminent, that are about to take place, where God is going to show his disapproval and pour out his wrath on the Jewish nation and all the evil that they had done, the idolatry and the fornication of rejecting Jesus as their Messiah. Their punishment is about to take place, and it is so sure that you can say it has already fallen, even though it hasn't yet, but it's imminent. It's just around the corner.
She has become a dwelling for demons, and a haunt for every impure spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable animal. For all the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries.
So Jerusalem had become great and powerful from an earthly perspective, rich in many things, and from a worldly perspective. And they were supposed to be a spiritual city, but they had become so earthly, prosperous, and wealthy that they lost sight of spiritual things and were only concerned about their physical. I mean, that's really what the Jews were all about all along. They were mostly always concerned about maintaining their elite status in God's eyes as his chosen people. And their overall mindset was that God's concern for them was to make sure that their nation was better than anybody else's nation. That to be one from the Jewish nation was better than to be from any other nation, because God showed you favor, God made you rich, God made you powerful, God subdued other kingdoms for you. And they just like that elite status. And that's really not the point. It never was the point. The point was that God would show by his favor of the Jews in the Old Covenant that he would show favor on whomever he would choose in the New Covenant, that he can pick and choose whatever he wants, and he's justified in doing so. For whoever he chooses can praise and glorify him for his mercy and grace. But those who are not chosen have no right to complain against him because he's God.
Then I heard another voice from heaven say, "Come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues."
Now, my people would be Christians. And this was also going back to Matthew chapter 24, where Jesus gave warning signs, says, when you see these things, flee to the mountains, because when you get surrounded by an army, they're going to cut you off and cut out your food and water and starve you out and kill you. So he gives his people a warning and a way of escape.
For her sins are piled up to heaven, and God has remembered her crimes.
And one of her primary crimes would be the crucifixion of Jesus Christ himself. Now, they'd certainly been unfaithful over and over throughout history. But the crime that sealed their doom was the rejection and crucifixion of Jesus Christ, our Lord.
Give back to her as she has given. Pay her back double for what she has done. Pour her a double portion from her own cup. Give her as much torment and grief as the glory and luxury she gave herself. In her heart she...
Well, it's pretty rough. Whenever we talk about glory and luxury, people will say, well, I want as much as possible. I want, you can essentially have never enough for most people. But yet, he says, now give them the same measure of torment and grief as they had of glory and luxury. So, to turn it around, they would say, give me as much torment and grief as you could possibly give me, because I could never get enough. So that's one problem with seeking after glory and luxury, is the possibility of seeing the other perspective at the same measure.
He boasts, I sit enthroned as queen. I am not a widow. I will never mourn.
So that's the arrogant attitude of the Jews. The Jews had this arrogant, elitist attitude that they were God's chosen people, and God would continuously do nothing but bless them. I don't know why they would, even have that idea, because there was so much punishment that they had received throughout time, but they seemed to forget about those things.
Therefore, in one day her plagues will overtake her.
So these 7 bowls of wrath, the plagues, the last plagues that will be poured out on Jerusalem or Babylon or the harlot, it's all the same. It says it's going to pour out in one day. Now, the war actually lasted longer than that. But, I don't know. I'd have to look into a little bit more detail. I know they surrounded the city and cut off their supplies for a while, and people starved, and women would even eat their children. But, maybe when they decided to come in on the city, it came in one day, and all 7 bowls of wrath were poured out in one day. Therefore, in one day, her plagues will overtake her.
Death, mourning, and famine. She will be consumed by fire. For mighty is the Lord God who judges her.
And that's what happened. The city was completely burned. The temple was completely destroyed, where not one stone was left on another, and you couldn't even tell that a temple used to be there. That's why the Wailing Wall is not part of the temple. That's the Roman fortress that was built near where the temple used to be. But the Jews today go and pray at the Wailing Wall, and they're actually praying. What they think is the temple is actually a Roman fortress.
When the kings of the earth who committed adultery with her and shared her luxury see the smoke of her burning, they will weep and mourn over her. Terrified at her torment, they will stand far off and cry, Woe, woe to you, great city, you mighty city of Babylon. In 1 hour your doom has come.
And anytime it says Babylon, it's talking about Jerusalem. They're talking about the destruction of Jerusalem by the Roman Empire. And in the previous chapter, it said the beast, which is the Roman Empire, hated the harlot, which was riding on her back. And so the Roman Empire destroyed Jerusalem and the Jewish nation.
The merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargoes anymore. Cargoes of gold, silver, precious stones, and pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, and scarlet cloth, every sort of citron wood, and articles of every kind made of ivory, costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble, cargoes of cinnamon and spice, of incense, myrrh, and frankincense, of wine and olive oil, of fine flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and carriages, and human beings sold as slaves.
So, just with the daily sacrifices and all that the Jews had to do as part of their religion, people cashed in on all that. And apparently the Jews had a lot of wealth, and they could buy whatever they wanted And people around the world knew that, and they would deliberately come to sell to them because they could make a big profit off of them. And so whenever you destroy Jerusalem, you destroy their customers, and they weep and mourn, not because of the loss of the Jews' life, but because of the loss of their customers and their profitability.
They will say, "The fruit you longed for is gone from you. All your luxury and splendor have vanished, never to be recovered. The merchants who..."
So it says never to be recovered. Jerusalem is going to be destroyed, never to be recovered. Now, they built a new Jerusalem on top of it, of the old Jerusalem, I think. The city of David, what they called City of David. I don't know, like abandoned, or certainly not very strong. They've built new stuff on top of where Jerusalem used to be. And so just because there is a Jerusalem now doesn't mean it's the same Jerusalem that was there before.
who sold these things and gained their wealth from her will stand far off, terrified at her torment. They will weep and mourn and cry out, "Woe! Woe to you, great city, dressed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls."
So that's the same way that chapter 17 described the harlot. It said the harlot was dressed in purple and scarlet with gold and precious stones and pearls. Which I don't think there's any doubt that this destruction of Babylon is the same as the harlot in the previous chapter. And both the harlot and Babylon is talking about Jerusalem. This is another, there's so much evidence that the book of Revelation was written before 70 AD to talk about the destruction of Jerusalem. All this is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. But most people want to claim that the book was written after the destruction of Jerusalem, therefore it couldn't be talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, when there's actually very little evidence at all, and maybe no credible evidence to suggest that. And there's overwhelming evidence throughout the book that it's talking about things that are imminently about to take place, things that are going to happen really soon. So, if it was written before 68 AD during the reign of Nero, and it talked about the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, it makes perfect sense.
In 1 hour, such great wealth has been brought to ruin. Every sea captain and all who travel by ship, the sailors, and all who earn their living from the sea will stand far off. When they see the smoke of her burning, they will exclaim, "Was there ever a city like this great city?" They will throw dust on their heads, and with weeping and mourning cry out, "Woe! Woe to you, great city, where all who had ships on the sea became rich through her wealth."
See, that's what they're concerned about. They're concerned about the loss of their wealth and the loss of their customers that would buy anything to fulfill their needs, to offer daily sacrifices or whatever, maybe even just to live in luxury because they thought they deserved it.
In 1 hour, she has been brought to ruin. Rejoice over her, you heavens. Rejoice, you people of God. Rejoice, apostles and prophets, for God has judged her with the judgment she imposed on you.
All right, so that's another clue as to who Babylon is. It's telling the apostles and prophets to rejoice because God is judging the one who persecuted you. And Jerusalem and the Jews were the source of persecution for the apostles and prophets, including Jesus.
Then a mighty angel picked up a boulder the size of a large millstone and threw it into the sea, and said, "With such violence the great city of Babylon will be thrown down, never to be found again. The music of harpists and musicians, pipers and trumpeters will never be heard in you again. No worker of any trade will ever be found in you again. The sound of a millstone will never be heard in you again. The light of a lamp will never shine in you again. The voice of bridegroom and bride will never be heard in you again. Your merchants were the world's important people. By your magic spell, all the nations were led astray. In her was found the blood of prophets and of God's holy people, of all who have been slaughtered on the earth.
So that last verse is more confirmation that we're talking about Jerusalem, and all this stuff about no worker of any trade will ever be found in you again. I believe that would have to do with the fact that even though we have a Jerusalem today, it's not the same city that was there before. That city was utterly wiped out and destroyed, completely wiped out, and then a new city was built on top of it. And that's not the same city. It was utterly destroyed. So we're talking about the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And that completes Revelation chapter 18.